So now I'm hoping that we have enough of a mix of people in the room of either practicing or retired artists and researchers who, yeah, I know it's, that we can have a discussion about how people navigate. And I think navigate's the right tool because it often feels like you're in a very rocky ocean and you're trying to figure out the best course of following your two passions, right? And how to bring the two together and how to live those two things. And
maybe for me also, like it was actually brought to my attention again last week when I had a conversation with my department chair, some sense that, you know, it's kind of, you're not a serious researcher if you are studying your passions, or if you're not objective outside it, or also if you have another passion apart from research, then that's also, you're not a dedicated researcher, or all of those kind of slightly underground questions that you might run into when you're this weird species that's sort of a little bit of everything. I mean, actually we were at this meeting in January, which were mostly scientists, but also people that were sort of in between, and it's kind of, a lot of academia is not really well made for it, and I could imagine a lot of arts is also not well made for it, for those people who are a little bit in between, but maybe here is many of us.
yes, I think that the hope is that we have a little bit of a discussion that might prove useful for people who are considering moving in one direction or another, or battling with the tides that are pulling them in different directions. Or I know it would be useful for me because I'm always at this juncture.
Yeah.
So I think it's useful for us to all use this as a therapy session, basically.
Feeling like you feel at pretty much all of them when you're trying to do them together.
Exactly. But are there any practical things that you've encountered, like, or solutions that you've come up with, or if you've had questions? Julia, I know you have a.
Well, then you said solutions, and I was like,
no solutions.
I was just going to express.
Go.
That is a solution.
No, I so echo this because so this is, I think, true for all arts, science interactions, but I dare to say that for dance, it's particularly bad because dance is really the lowest in the pecking order of the arts. In the theaters, you've got the singers and musicians and so on, and you've got the dance, which is just a courtship ritual usually. Nothing is just for, recreation purposes, nothing to be taken serious. And I point that out. Okay, solution. I do point that out. People find that a bit annoying sometimes. I write it in my papers. I have a paper called Not All About Sex and talking about the functions, the psychobiological functions of dance. So being there with the science as well, as a former dancer, and trying to link the two, always saying, I know that there is this conception, and then maybe telling a story that my friends and colleagues who work in theaters have the same experience, that dance is not as appreciated as other arts. And when you then also talk to scientists, are the scientists going to tell us what movements we're going to do? So this is one big contentious issue where people come up with that, oh, you're going to tell me that that movement is better to do than that one. So now you have to do choreographies only with those. And that's not that fear sometimes is there from the side of the dancers, and to find ways of talking to each other without stepping on toes, but also there's this thing of, if dancers or artists and scientists criticize each other a lot, then the community around us will say, oh, that's a big problem as well, because they have a bunch of people they can never even agree with that amongst themselves, and that's a problem for our discipline too. So here was my expression.
I love it. Asaf has a go ahead.
Yeah, okay. If you read about it,
I did. I read you. I'm with you.
So I have a lot of things to say about that. First, I totally agree with everything that was said before. As it comes to research, it's interesting on looking a bit my trajectory over the last 14 years, and maybe another good example is Guido's work, I think, as well. And in both of our work, I see kind of a similar trajectory going from a very even though both of us are dancers that also do research on dance, we all both kind of did a lot of work in the beginning where dancers were like the mice, or if not the mice, then they're like the contractors. So they make for us stimuli, or they're like kind of, they're creating the kind of things we need, the images we need, or the videos we need, or the choreographies we need, and so forth. And I think that in my work, and much more successfully in his work, that goes into starting to collaborate. So he has a ongoing collaboration now with Matthias
Matthias
Spanning, and that is was part of that, what is part of this project, and that where they're co-researchers. So now and I think, and this goes, I think, to what Annika was saying, it's really important, I think, for artists to know what I think we have to think of what the term is in Wagner is communities of practice. When you do research in community of practice, everyone needs to find their question and what interests them in that, and it might be different. But they have to have it. If they're just there because they're serving their role, the dance is there to show people what that means, or we need to create synchrony. Let us dancers, they're good at synchrony. That's dead already. I'm sorry, but it's like that will not be a collaborative project. So I think there's a place of like what is the curiosity of the dancer, the artist, what are they researching, and how that meets the interest in the question of the researchers, and maybe there something can happen. And it might not be one, it might be different projects that meet each other, but it's really important that we work in communities of practice, I think.
Julia, and then Peter?
Yeah, just echoing that exactly, that the beginning also for me was very much, okay, as an alibi, I'm going to design an experiment that a scientist will be fine of. I'm going to work on dance, but I need something that I can publish. And especially at the beginning, it's like when you and Beatrice Calvo-Marino and Emily Cross, they were all starting out, and we're using dance as a model behavior to study human cognition, different processes, affective processes, cognitive processes, like synchronization and so on. So it's a little bit officially also saying we are using that as an alibi to be able to go deeper also in the artistic scientific collaboration, even if it from the outside for an artist will look like I'm a guinea pig here or what. But there it's the situation of having to talk to each other and say, I'll present some work tomorrow where I had that conversation with my dear friend and colleague, Shahzad Khorsandi, on a project on Iranian classical dance, where we put the scientific method over it and chopped it a little bit, and but from that start alibi study, we could then expand and go more into a real dialogue than science dialogue. But I just want to apologize in a sense to all the dancers maybe, and myself in the past, that sometimes we need to do this to be heard first as an alibi, and then we can slowly show, yeah, but it's not that it's fringe research, because we now are a little bit more ecologically valid, and maybe we've done the same study in the lab, and now we just do it again in a more ecological setting, and look, we have the same results. How could that be? So, just it's also part of a process to establish the field, I think, what I want to say, and just apologize for Texas and practice sometimes.
Peter, do you have a follow-up or a question?
It's in a different point.
Yeah, go ahead.
And obviously being slightly less experienced in this field, and some of these
Giants,
giants was exactly where my friend
old people, yeah, that's it.
maybe more or
Yeah.
less interested. But just to make sure, you're just asking for experiences and thoughts.
Yeah, this is an open
Questions,
therapy session.
challenges.
So whatever just express yourself. You could do it in movement if you want.
Then one thing that came up in some of the dancing stuff we did with the Lindy Hoppers and tango dancers and the partner dancing was, so there's a lot of dancers in that team. And firstly, I think that's nice because it means, so we're trying to get something out of the measurements that would make sense to a dancer as well. So get dancers to watch it and know which movements they're doing and that kind of stuff. And one thing where we always the project goes two ways is that we could spend a lot of time on that and get something that the dancers would read and be excited about and understand, but that's often how to publish, I think, because no one cares about the synergy structure of a swing out, but they care about the synergy, whatever it is. But sometimes they also fit together, because then all the movement notations is the right way of splitting the motion capture data into pieces. So just to say that that's a balance we keep jumping on, and someone has good ideas for that, that's next. Also that we consulted the dancers on the experimental setup and on what body parts to focus on and that kind of stuff. As an attempt to try to make it not just coxswain that pretends to, or like, to not just hide away all the actual dance. And then the other thing I was thinking was that one of the anthropologists told me, why don't you sit down and write about what you yourself feel each, well, you know, the project is on connection, feelings, and partner dance. And he said, how about using your own experiences? And then, of course, my brain shortcut it, and I listened to my deep said, that's weird, but I think it's a good idea. But I don't know how to do that.
But it's
I
just so
haven't been
funny,
sure.
right? Because your students will come with a first person description of what they did and like, no,
Yeah,
you never
exactly.
use I.
Exactly.
But and maybe you, yeah, I think that.
But I guess
you are-
humanities have tools for this, right? And that may or may not work, but maybe those are worth using at least for a reflection process on why we picked them. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I would say that in my experience, I'll be sharing also my research process in collaboration with dancers. But I've also done, I'm doing it with Tibetan monks as well, very similar ways. It's important. It's a once at once. It's a super exciting because you're going into new places, new parts of science, maybe that doesn't fit like existing theories and so on. But at the same time, it's also super challenging because it's slow and super messy, and you don't really know where you're going, and you have to constantly check in, I think, with each other. So it's not a very efficient way of doing science, which is unfortunately in this day and age, I think, super challenging, especially when you're young. I mean, I'm now lucky that I have a permanent job, so you know, and I have enough papers that nobody's going to complain if some papers just take longer. But you know, I think that's also important to recognize when you are in this field, that it's exciting to work on this stuff, but it's also really hard because of the time pressure. And at the same time, if you do want to really seriously do it, I think you can't avoid going slow and checking in and improvising together, you know, the scientists and the dancers, and then talking together and then looking at the graphs together. And yeah.
Yeah, you should.
I want to react to something you said that touched me and that reflects something that I think is wrong in our science collaborations, the way we know it so far. That you said, oh, maybe we can show in an ecological study something that has been shown in the lab. It should be the opposite. I mean, scientists should say, we have replicated in the lab what we see in reality, meaning that they found the right, or we found the right variables. And I think we have, again, a political move to show that this should be in that
Yeah.
direction, and not the other. But we are suffering from that
Yeah, I agree.
orientation.
I don't know if this is controversial, but it's at least a good segue for what happens tomorrow when we talk about dance movement therapy. Is that by taking a very specific observed phenomenon of the power of dance to heal, we do that a bit, right? You're seeing it in context in an ecological setting, and you're allowing for a little bit of the mess that Marika talked about, but with an observable, measurable output. And I think that that's maybe why there's funding for it, and why it's something that can be done, is that it's a compromise, maybe to a certain extent. But I think if we could find more of those compromises, places where it works, where it has an effect, especially as funding goes down for the arts and therefore anything that looks, you know, research in the arts, we have to be clever, right? We have to be smart about what we do. So I think my only advice, not doing anything to do with dance yet, is to make it worthwhile for people, right? So it has to be observable, measurable value. I didn't say there isn't other value, but it has to be. I think I may be more of a pragmatist.
But echoing exactly that phrase that you said, now the second time I would like to do research on that, and it's not happening now. Maybe it is a good pragmatic solution to say, okay, I'm going to do a research project, then science. Part of it is going to be hard science, I mean, or hard philosophy, or hard anthropology, or which discipline you're coming from, so that I can publish that, and then on the side, this other project evolves and defines and reveals itself. it was not in my case, it was not a conscious decision. It happened like that I came from labs that were very much up to, operationalize variables. And if you want to study this, you must be able to publish it in mainstream journals. And that trained me for the scientific method, and I'm grateful for that. I could just not let go of the other side. So I always kept going on the side with that. And that's very much also the truth for many of us at work in the field, that it's always something on the side. But thanks to that extra effort that people are doing, and we as a community are doing for that discipline, I guess, maybe at some point we will reach a critical mass and say, hey, there is something here that is an aim in itself. And it doesn't have to be necessarily hard to, using the scientific method in its traditional way. Because I'm not saying we shouldn't apply it. And very often, these discussions that we can maybe also have together, for example, so I'm an experimental psychologist who's training neuroscience. So I speak to philosopher. Well, so there are many methods where we don't know of each other's methods, but just saying what my research question is, you can say, oh, I would approach this from that side. And maybe we can then find a way to operationalize it, sorry, the word, in ways that are actually quite traditional. So example, from my domain, it's in experimental psychology, there are all these models of how emotions happen, how we feel emotions, how we perceive them. So there's Ekman with the basic emotion account, and there's Lisa Feldman-Barrett with the theory of constructed emotions, perfectly possible in an experimental design, but with dance, and which you can then actually publish, and you just use these theories that are in that field, and then you also write that stuff about dance in the discussion, and it is then published. It's a little bit about how I feel it's a little bit about spinning all the time, like say the alibi part, but put some stuff into the discussion.
But it's sad, right, that has to be the approach. I think it is sad. It is sad. I think the reason I was so glad we could have Greta speak is that she's clearly coming from the artistic side. And she's obviously unbiased, has identified the value of touch in dance, but also touch in everyday experiences of coordination and being. And then she's put a very empirical slant on it, but it's helping inform her own artistry and her own thoughts about what she does. And it's a really beautiful example of how it can be done, I think. I think we need to learn as more empiricists, like I would say I'm more on the other side. And so even though I've worked on music cognition, I definitely am not doing so as a musician. But she is really doing science as an artist. And I think we need to be inspired a little bit by that and maybe just have to work with more people that are thinking that way. I think it could be just a question of numbers. Normally it's a group of scientists with one token artist, and they're just one voice in the many. And even if you're just a small group, you're still being influenced by the many empiricists who are going to, peer review you or fund you, or we just need more of their voices. And I think a lot of funding bodies now are requiring it, that you have non-academic partners. So that's another, I think, very, real world way in which this can happen. Like just bring them into the conversations, listen to them a bit more. They should be on peer review boards. They should be.
It can be hard though.
It
So
is.
you just like something is can be hard to do something that's both good science and good art,
It's hard to do good science, to cool. Like
and hard to do.
there are a lot of people who are doing bad science and still publishing.
Yeah,
I think good science is I don't think that should be the rationale. Like I think we should all be trying to do good science, and most of us do crap science.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the art that's getting in the way.
I just for some of the Anderson stuff where they work with visual artists and stuff, sometimes they constrain each other in ways that feels uncomfortable. I mean, it can be done. It's just
I think
a
it's
challenge worth taking seriously also.
Yeah, I agree, but I think it's a cop-out that a lot of people, not that you, but that a lot of people, but I can't do it scientifically. That's not true. Like you just have to work harder.
I think Annika also wants.
Oh, sorry.
Related to what you were saying, I was thinking, for example, when you open an article, you have this impulse maybe to sketch the theoretical background or why this, where it's situated. And I think there it's good to have this impulse, okay, because hopefully there is in the tradition of science or in the tradition where you are, there is something actually valuable, right? I mean, it's not just tradition for the sake of being right or being proper science. So when we refer to this, that it's really useful, that we think, how is this really practically inspiring my way? how is it really helping me do what I want to do, and then refer to it, only if you can specify it in that way, not just to give you credits that you're doing something properly scientific, but to do this step first and ask, okay, how is it really informing what we do? I mean, maybe it's small, but there are things hopefully that are really valuable and inspiring, so. But the gateway is that it's valuable and inspiring to our work, not that it's credible.
I think, Deleuze and Guattari and Thousand Plateau, they have this, distinction between the science nomadic science and the royal science. Which relates, I think, to other distinctions they make, among them the minor and the major. And I think it's, the problem is that, and I think what we were saying, like, if we take something that is minor and try to make it be like the major, it loses its minor quality. And I feel that at least, and I think a lot of what you were saying, that kind of the quality of work that you need, that seems to be so meaningful, for example, in this that I would love to see happening also in labs, which are not officially transdisciplinary, like going and just watching the grass for a while would be nice also, just for between scientists. You don't need Buddhists to help you do that, but it's often where those things happen, because those are like those minor spaces, and those are often require more time, and we need maybe to resist the wish or to make them major. And I think that's really hard, because of course what we want to make them major, because first we care for them, and the major is what counts in the world. And so Science Royale in this and Deleuze Guattari. And so we try to make it, and we have to go into the good journals, and we have to have a conference now with this name, and we should make talks and have PowerPoints about it, and all these kind of things that characterize the royal science. And so I would say what was interesting, and I think this is what I think Yola was also saying, I'm actually very curious about those pockets of minor that we can create. So for example, the work, so these today is already great because we're a small group and there's a relatively interdisciplinary, but we're still in kind of this weird sitting in rows and talking. But like the next 2 days, but like later in the week when we have this workshop, we will be kind of in a very different setup. So it's kind of nice to mix them. So we have the conference and we can get the funding from our universities because we have a talk and all that kind of thing. And then we have this also extra time to play around. So how do we create? I think I would say to everyone here who is organizer, either as a teacher, as a student, as whatever, how can we create pockets of minor within the major? And not in order to majorize them, and just like, this is going to be just playing, we're just going to play here, that's okay, and allow that to ourselves. And it's hard because our time is so precious, our linear time is so precious. And so we need to make choices, of course, and let more space, more time for the minor, because the minor is slow. But I think that's and then not try to make, so I think this is something we can do literally, like create those small reserves.
I'm still gonna try and make it major. I believe that you should.
I think that's maybe a really nice.
Yeah, so,
Nice note on which to end
yeah, the
so that we-
dictatorial one,
yeah.
yeah.
So we can have also some time for
Coffee
coffee
and
playing.
continued discussion. I will join again at 8:30.
30.
It just can't be major.
That's the thing.
Because then it becomes a big choice.
Yeah.
Forces that.
They inform, like within the manner gesture of Eric.
Yes, we will be going to our coffee break now, and we will see you again at 3:30.
Once you make it major, it's that.